late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sprawling campus, its golden light warming the old brick buildings and the tree-lined pathways. Olivia adjusted her backpack and glanced at her phone, her GPS guiding her toward the admissions office. It was her first time visiting the university, and she had the nervous excitement of someone standing at the edge of a new chapter in life. The campus was beautiful, in that quintessential college brochure way. Green lawns dotted with students lounging on blankets, tall oak trees whispering in the breeze, and the faint hum of laughter and conversation echoing from nearby courtyards. Everything felt alive, yet orderly, like a small world perfectly contained within its borders. As she walked, Olivia couldn't help but notice the details. The way the sunlight glinted off the fountain in the main square, the smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with coffee wafting from a student cafe, and the distant sound of a saxophone, probably someone practicing for a recital. It was idyllic, the kind of place she could easily imagine herself calling home for the next 4 years. Ahead of her, a tour group was gathered near a large bronze statue of the university's founder, the guide animatedly pointing out historical facts. Olivia smiled faintly. She had opted to explore the campus on her own instead of joining the formal tour. Crowds weren't her thing, and besides, she liked the idea of wandering freely, taking in the place at her own pace. Near the library, a group of students sat cross-legged on the lawn, deep in discussion. One of them, a tall guy with glasses, caught her eye and smiled politely before returning to his conversation. It was small moments like that, simple, friendly gestures that made the campus feel welcoming, almost familiar. The admissions office was tucked into a quieter corner of the campus, housed in an ivy-covered building that looked like it belonged in a period drama. Olivia pushed open the heavy wooden door, the cool air inside a stark contrast to the warmth outside. The receptionist greeted her with a cheerful smile, handing her a packet of information and directing her to a waiting area. She sank into a leather armchair, flipping through the glossy brochures, filled with pictures of smiling students and testimonials about how this university had changed their lives. As she waited for her advisor meeting, she glanced around the room. It was a mix of prospective students and their parents, some chatting softly, while others scrolled through their phones. Olivia's gaze wandered to a bulletin board on the far wall, cluttered with flyers for clubs, campus events, and tutoring services. One flyer, half torn and hanging by a single tack, caught her attention. It was different from the rest, older, with faded writing that read, "Do you know the truth about Holloway Hall?" Her curiosity flickered for a moment, but before she could think too much about it, the receptionist called her name. Olivia tucked the flyer into the back of her mind as she followed the receptionist down a long hallway to meet with her advisor. The meeting was brief but encouraging, the advisor painting a glowing picture of campus life and all the opportunities the university had to offer. By the time Olivia left the office, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a soft, pink glow across the campus. The air had cooled, and the pathways that had been bustling earlier were now quieter, with only the occasional student passing by. Olivia decided to explore a little more before heading back to her hotel. The evening light gave the campus a different character, softer and more intimate. She wandered past the science building, its large glass windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight, and toward the older part of campus, where the architecture was more Gothic, with towering spires and intricate stone carvings. She found herself standing in front of a building she hadn't noticed before. The plaque near the entrance read Holloway Hall. It was imposing, its tall, narrow windows dark and uninviting. The building seemed out of place, its facade slightly more weathered than the others around it. Olivia felt a strange pull, a mix of curiosity and hesitation, as if the building was daring her to step closer. But before she could decide what to do, a voice broke her train of thought. Pretty creepy, huh? She turned to see a girl about her age, with short, dark hair and a camera slung around her neck, standing a few feet away. Her smile was friendly, but her eyes carried a glint of mischief. I guess, Olivia replied, laughing nervously. Does anyone even use it? The girl shook her head. Not anymore. It's been closed for years. Some say it's haunted. Olivia raised an eyebrow, unsure if the girl was joking. Haunted? The girl shrugged. That's what they say. Something about a professor who went missing there decades ago. But who knows? It's probably just an old story they tell to freak out freshmen. Olivia chuckled, but the unease lingered. Well, it's working, she said, glancing back at the darkened windows of Holloway Hall. The girl grinned. Don't worry, it's just a building. Nothing to be scared of. She gave Olivia a playful wave and started walking away, her footsteps echoing faintly on the cobblestone path. Olivia stood there for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on the building. The shadows seemed to stretch just a little farther here, the air a touch colder. She shook her head, brushing off the feeling. It was just an old building after all, nothing more. As she turned to head back toward the main square, a faint sound reached her ears. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like the footsteps on stone. She paused, glancing over her shoulder, but the pathway behind her was empty. The sound stopped as quickly as it had started. Shaking off a flicker of unease, Olivia continued walking, the growing twilight casting the campus in deep blues and purples. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimed softly, marking the hour. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp air that seemed to sharpen the edges of everything. The trees looked greener, the bricks of the buildings more vivid. Olivia woke up early, still buzzing from the excitement of the campus visit. Her hotel room window faced the university, and from her vantage point, she could see the tops of the older buildings peeking out from behind rows of trees. Holloway Hall was one of them. She noticed its silhouette immediately, though in the daylight it seemed less imposing, just another old structure among many. After breakfast, she decided to explore the campus again before her afternoon sessions. She packed a small notebook and wandered back to the main square, her steps falling into rhythm with the bustling energy of the students around her. It was a different scene from the previous evening, brighter, livelier. Clusters of students hurried between classes, their voices mixing into a low hum that filled the air. Olivia passed the library again, catching sight of the same tall guy with glasses she'd seen the day before. This time, he was seated on the steps, balancing a coffee cup on one knee while flipping through a thick textbook. He noticed her and gave a brief nod of recognition. Olivia smiled back, but didn't stop to talk. Her route brought her back toward Holloway Hall. In daylight, she could see the details she had missed before. The intricate carvings around the doorway, the weathered gargoyles perched at the corners of the roof, their faces almost comically grim. She lingered at the edge of the pathway leading to the building, her curiosity tugging at her again. Hey, you made it back. The voice startled her, and she turned to see the girl from the previous night, the one with the camera. She was standing a few feet away, holding a takeout coffee and grinning as if they were already old friends. "Oh, hi," Olivia said, a little caught off guard. "Yeah, just looking around." The girl laughed. "You and everyone else who comes here. Holloway's like a magnet for visitors. Something about the way it looks, I guess. Or the stories." Olivia hesitated, then nodded toward the building. "So, are the stories true? About it being haunted?" The girl shrugged, her smile widening. "Depends on who you ask. Some people swear they've seen lights in the windows, heard strange noises at night. Others think it's all just an old campus legend. But it's fun to imagine, right?" Olivia laughed softly, though the memory of the faint tapping sound from the previous night prickled at the back of her mind. It definitely has a vibe. "I'm Emma, by the way," the girl said, extending it a hand. "I'm a junior here, photography major." "Olivia," she replied, shaking Emma's hand. "Prospective student." Emma tilted her head, studying Olivia for a moment. "You look like you're into this kind of stuff." "This kind of stuff?" Emma gestured toward Holloway Hall with a tilt of her coffee cup. "Weird buildings, creepy stories. You stopped, didn't you? Last night?" Olivia hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I mean, yeah, but only for a second. It's hard not to notice it." Emma grinned knowingly. "That's how it starts. Next thing you know, you're poking around after dark and scaring yourself silly." "Is that what you do?" Olivia asked, amused. "Sometimes," Emma admitted with a shrug. "I've been trying to get inside for ages, but they keep it locked up tight. Probably for the best, honestly. Not sure I'd like what I'd find." The words hung in the air between them for a moment, a faint shadow creeping into the bright morning. Emma glanced at her watch and sighed. "Anyway, I've got class. Good luck with the rest of your visit." Olivia watched her go, her curiosity about both Emma and Holloway Hall growing. She turned back to the building one last time before heading off toward the student center, where she had scheduled a session on campus housing. The rest of her day passed in a blur of information, sessions, and campus tours, her excitement tempered by a faint undercurrent of distraction. That evening, as the campus quieted again, Olivia found herself sitting alone at an outdoor cafe near the main square. The lights strung overhead cast a warm glow, and the sound of distant laughter drifted through the air. She flipped through her notebook, trying to organize her thoughts about the visit. But every so often, her eyes drifted back toward the darker part of campus, where Holloway Hall loomed in the shadows. The stories Emma had mentioned wouldn't leave her alone. Lights in the windows. Strange noises. Olivia tapped her pen against the table, debating whether to ask someone else about the building. Maybe it really was just a legend, a harmless piece of campus folklore designed to entertain incoming students. Or maybe not. She tucked the notebook away and stood, ready to head back to her hotel. As she passed the fountain in the main square, the sound of running water masking the quiet of the evening, she noticed something odd. A figure stood near the far edge of the square, just out of reach of the nearest street lamp. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. Olivia stopped, her stomach twisting. She squinted, trying to make out any details, but the figure was too far away to see clearly. She thought about calling out, but hesitated, a strange unease settling over her. And then, just as quickly as she had noticed them, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. The days that followed were a blur of scheduled activities and small discoveries as Olivia continued her visit. She met with professors, toured the art building, and joined a handful of other prospective students for lunch in the bustling dining hall. On the surface, everything was normal, exciting even. The campus felt alive, full of possibility. But the strange undercurrent she had felt on her first day hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Little things, scattered moments that didn't seem connected but left her feeling off. It started with the footsteps. The first time, she thought it was just her imagination. She had been walking back to her hotel late one evening, the sidewalks mostly deserted when she heard them. Slow, deliberate steps echoing faintly behind her. At first, she thought it was another student, but when she glanced over her shoulder, the street was empty. The sound stopped as soon as she did. She stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in the quiet, before shaking it off and walking quickly the rest of the way. The second time was harder to ignore. She was exploring the campus again in the early afternoon, her camera in hand, snapping photos of the older buildings and the lush greenery surrounding them. The footsteps came out of nowhere, faint but distinct, as if someone were trailing her just out of sight. She spun around, scanning the area, but saw nothing. No one. The pathways were empty except for a few students in the distance, far too far away to account for the sound. It wasn't just the footsteps. Other small, inexplicable things began to pile up. Her hotel keycard would stop working randomly, forcing her to return to the front desk for a replacement. Twice, she found her room door slightly ajar when she was sure she'd locked it. Her phone, which had been perfectly reliable until now, would lose signal entirely whenever she ventured near Holloway Hall, even though the rest of the campus had strong reception. And then there were the shadows. Olivia started noticing them in the corners of her vision, dark shapes flickering at the edges of her sight, only to vanish when she turned her head. It happened most often near Holloway Hall, which she now went out of her way to avoid. But once she caught one near the library and another by the fountain in the main square. Both times it was the same, a fleeting, almost humanoid silhouette that was gone before she could fully register it. She tried to ignore it, to write it off as a trick of her mind, but the unease was building. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. The thought of it sent a chill crawling up her spine, even in broad daylight. One evening, while flipping through the photos on her camera, Olivia froze. She had taken dozens of shots over the past few days. Campus landmarks, candid moments of students walking between classes, even a few of the sun setting behind the bell tower. But one photo stood out. It was a picture of the main square, taken from a bench where she'd been resting earlier that afternoon. The composition was ordinary, students walking across the cobblestone paths, the fountain sparkling in the sunlight. But in the background, near the edge of the frame, was a figure, blurred and indistinct. It stood just outside the reach of the fountain's light, its outline unnervingly familiar. Olivia's heart thudded as she stared at the image. She hadn't seen anyone standing there when she took the photo, and yet there it was, still, silent, and watching. The next day, she ran into Emma again near the student union. Emma greeted her with the same easy grin, but Olivia noticed the way her expression shifted when she brought up the photo. "Can I see it?" Emma asked, her voice unusually quiet. Olivia handed over the camera, her pulse quickening as Emma studied the image. For a moment, Emma didn't say anything. Then she handed it back, her face unreadable. "That's weird," she said carefully. "It could just be a shadow. Or, someone walking by." "It doesn't look like someone walking by," Olivia said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It looks like it's just standing there." Emma hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you're not the first person to notice strange things around here, especially near Holloway." Olivia's stomach sank. "What do you mean?" Emma shrugged, her tone casual, but her eyes betrayed her unease. "People talk about noises, shadows, stuff that doesn't make sense, but it's probably nothing. Just stories to scare new students." Olivia wanted to believe that, but the unease gnawing at her wouldn't let her. That night she locked her hotel room door and pulled the curtains tightly shut, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, felt like a warning, a presence. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was getting closer. The night was unnaturally still, the kind of quiet that pressed against Olivia's ears and made every sound feel amplified. She stood at the edge of the campus, just outside the path leading to Holloway Hall. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts as she clutched the flashlight Emma had given her earlier that evening. Emma hadn't wanted her to come here. "If you're smart, you'll leave it alone," she'd said. But Olivia couldn't. Not after the shadows, the footsteps, and especially not after the figure in the photo. Whatever was happening, it felt like it had been building toward this moment, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness as she stepped onto the path. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting together to form an almost suffocating canopy. Each step felt heavier than the last, the gravel crunching beneath her sneakers unnaturally loud. She tried to focus on her breathing, but the weight in the air made it hard to think, like something was pressing down on her. Holloway Hall appeared suddenly in the flashlight's beam, its jagged silhouette rising out of the shadows like a forgotten relic. The windows were black and empty, but they seemed to watch her as she approached. The front door was still boarded up, the wood weathered and splintered with age. Olivia hesitated, the flashlight trembling in her hand. This was ridiculous. What was she even looking for? Answers? Proof? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't leave, not yet. Something was drawing her closer, like an invisible thread pulling taut. The sound came first, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Her heart seized as she whipped the flashlight toward the source, but the beam revealed only the empty steps leading up to the door. The tapping stopped. For a moment, all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. And then it started again, this time behind her. She spun around, the flashlight shaking violently in her hand. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice cracking with panic. The path behind her was empty, the trees casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. The tapping grew louder, closer, until it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, pulsing through the air, through her chest. A shadow moved at the edge of the flashlight's beam, sliding between the trees like smoke. Olivia froze, the light catching just enough to reveal a shape. Tall, impossibly thin, its limbs unnaturally long and angular. It wasn't walking so much as gliding, its movements smooth and deliberate, like it was studying her. Her breath hitched as the thing stepped into full view. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a blank void, pale and featureless. The sight of it made her stomach twist, a primal terror surging through her body as every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. The creature tilted its head as if curious before it took a step forward. Olivia stumbled backward, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she tripped over a tree root. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her as the flashlight rolled from her hand. Darkness swallowed the path, leaving only the faint outline of the creature looming over her. Scrambling, she grabbed the flashlight and pointed it upward. The beam caught the creature mid-step, and it froze, its featureless face turned toward her. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and then it screamed. The sound was inhuman, a piercing guttural wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Olivia clapped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face as the scream reverberated through her skull. She scrambled to her feet, the flashlight clutched tightly in her hand as she bolted down the path. The sound of footsteps followed her, faster now, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Olivia didn't dare look back. The image of the creature burned into her mind. The path twisted and turned, the trees blurring together as she ran blindly, her lungs burning with every breath. Ahead, the campus lights came into view, their soft glow, a beacon in the darkness. Almost there, she thought, her legs screaming in protest as she pushed herself harder. But just as she reached the edge of the woods, the air grew heavy again, the same oppressive weight pressing down on her chest. A shadow darted in front of her, and she skidded to a stop, nearly losing her balance. The creature was there, standing between her and the safety of the campus. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating, its blank face turned directly toward her. Olivia backed away, her mind racing. There's no way out. The thought hit her like a physical blow, the hopelessness sinking in as the creature began to move toward her again. And then, from somewhere behind her, a voice. "Olivia!" She whipped around to see Emma running toward her, a bright beam of light cutting through the darkness. Emma didn't stop, didn't hesitate. She grabbed Olivia's arm and yanked her forward, the two of them sprinting toward the campus lights. Behind them, the creature let out another scream, its footsteps pounding the ground as it gave chase. They burst out of the woods and onto the main square, the creature stopping just short of the tree line. It stood there, its pale, featureless face barely visible in the faint glow of the streetlights. For a moment, Olivia thought it might step forward, crossing the boundary between the woods and the campus. But it didn't. It simply stood there, watching, until it dissolved into the shadows. Emma doubled over, gasping for breath, while Olivia collapsed onto a nearby bench, her entire body trembling. Neither of them spoke for a long time, the silence filled only by the distant hum of campus life. Finally, Emma looked at her, her face pale but determined. "We're not safe yet." Olivia stared at her, the weight of those words sinking in. Whatever they had just faced, it wasn't over, not even close. The campus was eerily quiet as dawn crept over the horizon, the soft light painting the brick buildings in shades of gold and amber. Olivia sat on the edge of a fountain in the main square, her legs pulled up to her chest, staring blankly at the water as it rippled gently in the breeze. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving her with a hollow, numb sensation that she couldn't shake. Emma sat beside her, silent and tense. The flashlight she had used to save Olivia was still clutched in her hands, the metal dented from where she had slammed it against something. She wasn't even sure what. Neither of them had spoken much since they escaped the woods. What was there to say? The events of the night replayed in Olivia's mind on an endless loop. The creature's face, or lack thereof, its screams, the way it had moved. The oppressive weight of its presence still lingered on her chest, like a phantom pressing down on her lungs. She closed her eyes, but the darkness behind her eyelids was worse. It brought back flashes of its featureless face, the gleam of moonlight on its elongated limbs. She opened them again quickly. "I don't understand," Olivia said finally, her voice quiet and raw. She didn't look at Emma. "What was it? Why didn't it follow us past the trees?" Emma didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was low and uncertain. "I don't know. Maybe it can't. Maybe it's bound to the woods somehow, or to Holloway Hall." She rubbed her forehead, her expression troubled. "I've heard stories, but nothing like this. Nothing this real." Olivia finally turned to face her. "What stories?" Emma hesitated, glancing around the empty square before lowering her voice. "Just old rumors. About the professor who disappeared from Holloway Hall decades ago. Some people say he was working on, I don't know, rituals." She shook her head, almost as if she couldn't believe she was saying it out loud. "The official story is that he just left one day and never came back, but a lot of students think he opened some kind of doorway, let something in." Olivia shivered despite the growing warmth of the morning. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" Emma gave her a sideways glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't. Until now." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Olivia stared down at her hands, her nails dirty and her palms scraped from their desperate escape. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Emma exhaled slowly, leaning back against the edge of the fountain. "I don't know. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem like it's going to leave the woods, but that doesn't mean it's gone." She hesitated, glancing at Olivia. "Are you still thinking about coming here?" The question hit her harder than she expected. The university had seemed perfect when she'd arrived, beautiful, full of life and promise. But now, she couldn't see it the same way. The shadows felt darker, the silence heavier. The idea of walking these paths every day, knowing what she now knew, made her stomach churn. "I don't know," Olivia admitted. Her voice cracked slightly and she swallowed hard. "How am I supposed to act like this didn't happen? Like that thing isn't still out there?" Emma didn't have an answer, and Olivia hadn't expected her to. They sat in silence for a while, watching the campus slowly come to life as students began to trickle out of the dorms, oblivious to the events of the night before. The normalcy of it all was almost maddening, as if the creature and the terror it brought had left no mark on the world but them. Finally, Emma stood, brushing off her jeans. "We should go. You need some rest." Olivia nodded and followed her back toward the dorms, her legs feeling like lead with every step. As they passed the path leading to Holloway Hall, Olivia couldn't help but glance toward it. The building stood silent and foreboding in the distance, its windows catching the morning light like empty eyes. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move behind one of them, but when she blinked, it was gone. By the time she reached her hotel room, the exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. She collapsed onto the bed without even bothering to change, her mind too foggy to think straight. Sleep came in fits and starts, filled with fragmented nightmares of chasing shadows and faceless figures. When she woke hours later, the sunlight streaming through the curtains offered little comfort. Emma texted her around noon, asking if she wanted to meet up. Olivia almost said no, but the idea of being alone made her chest tighten. She agreed, and they spent the afternoon walking through the busier parts of campus, avoiding the woods and Holloway entirely. For a few hours, things felt normal again. Almost. As the day wore on and Olivia's visit drew to a close, she found herself standing at the edge of the campus one last time, her suitcase by her side. Emma was with her, quiet but present, offering a steadying presence in the wake of everything they had been through. "You'll be okay," Emma said softly, her voice steady but kind. "Whatever you decide." Olivia nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She glanced back at the campus, her gaze lingering on the trees in the distance. The woods looked calm in the daylight, almost inviting. But she knew better. As the cab pulled up and she climbed inside, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving something unfinished. The weight of the creature's presence, the unanswered questions about Holloway Hall. It all clung to her, like a shadow. As the car pulled away, she found herself glancing back one last time. For a brief moment, as the campus disappeared from view, she thought she saw something standing at the edge of the woods, watching. But then it was gone.